that we need to have in order to really understand what's at stake here and what the impact will be. And so the election is November the 7th, and this will be on the ballot. And so I want to thank the other staff who's here from the Grand Rapids Public School System as well. And so I'm Clay Jackson. I'm the president of the Greater Grand Rapids branch of the NAACP. And welcome to our home. And then I'll ask Dr. Roby to introduce herself as well.
Good. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ledrian Roby, and I am the proud superintendent at Grand Rapids Public Schools. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to Mr. Clay Jackson for the invitation to have this dialogue with our community. This is something that we feel is very important because it has impact not only for today, but what do we want for our future of our scholars and our community. Just a very brief overview of who I am. I am a 30-year educator. I began my career in Minneapolis Public Schools as a classroom teacher, and I've had experience as a teacher, a mentor teacher, an assistant principal, assistant superintendent, and then now superintendent. I work in both rural school districts, Covert, Michigan. How many people know where Covert is? Okay. I used to say Covert was the center of the universe. So Covert is about 60 miles southwest of here. And that was my first introduction to the Michigan community. I've also been, as I said, Minneapolis Public Schools. I've worked in Richville Public Schools, which is a suburb of of Minneapolis. And then when the opportunity became available for me to pursue this opportunity, I was like, I love the Southwest Michigan area. I knew just a little bit about Grand Rapids. And so we took that leap of faith and are just so excited that we were able to come to the community. It's been 4 years, and I'm glad to be shedding the number of the COVID superintendent, because I was called the COVID superintendent. I'm just like, but I'm here to have a great discussion about what's taking place in our district and what the Reimagine GRPS plan means for the community outside of physical buildings, but what we hope to accomplish in the next couple of years.
All right, thank you. So you can take it away with the presentation.
All right.
And we are teed up. And after Dr. Roby goes through her presentation, we'll give everybody, want to definitely open it up to the audience. So think about some questions that you might have as well. And so we want everyone to leave here with a clear understanding. And then the other thing I want to ask everyone to do is to share this information. We always say it is very important to engage in the democratic process in terms of voting, but we got to make sure that our votes really count as well. So let's ask those questions. And then I'm going to ask you to share this information and share what you've learned here tonight. Because each of you in this room, you can reach at least 5 to 10 more people. And so that is important that we share the information that's here.
All right. So thank you. I want to take this opportunity just to share a little bit of information on the Reimagine GRPS plan with us and the zero tax increase bond. And so just as a point of clarification, go ahead and thank you. We've spent the last 2.5 years engaging in a framework that is a compilation of conversations and surveys and listening and learning. And again, as I am an outsider to the community, what has been of benefit to me, it allowed me opportunities to have really rich dialogue with community members, whether they be senior members of our community, special interest groups, student groups, unions, and others around what do we want for our district. And so the result of those multiple conversations and surveys and different touch points allowed for several themes to arise. We include focus groups, feedback sessions, open houses, design sessions, and some virtual exchanges. And so through the conversations, what rose to the top that people were most concerned about was academic achievement, and that's our bread and butter, right? So we are in business to ensure that we have positive outcomes for our young people. It is important that we make sure that they are able to launch when they leave our system. So that's critical. In addition to that, and so it's not just about how students achieve, but how they feel about being in those spaces. And so safety and security is something that has also arisen to the top. And if you think about what has taken place across our city and across our nation at different schools, safety and security has to be primary, because if you're fearful or you don't feel comfortable, that has impact on the learning environment. And it's not just about the physical safety, it's also about your social, emotional well-being and health and that sense of belonging. In addition to that, addressing some historic inequities. And again, as I am new to this community, some of the things that I have learned, and I am so grateful for those community members and parents and others who have spoke around some of the inequities, specifically in 49507, but across the community. And I've heard the stories about South High School, for example. I actually know the group of South High School that their last graduating class, I think, was 1968. This group of well-respected seniors get together monthly and still tell stories, and they've invited me a couple of times to hear those stories, and they have some really strong feelings about how that school was disbanded and how that experience was for them. And more recently, if you think about Preston High School, one of the stories I share with folks, when I first moved to the community, my neighbor, and again, we're new to the community, my neighbor said, "Oh yeah, I know who you are, and you're a Preston, I'm a Preston grad." I made the mistake, because I had been like 6 weeks in, of saying, "Oh, City High School." And it was just like, and I was like, "Oh, wait." And so, how some of the things that have taken place, and again, it's not as I make these statements, it's not to disparage my predecessors or the work that was done. People, I really do believe, make the best decisions with the information they have at the time. And as you look back on it from that 2020 vision, you think, oh, we could have done this differently. And so there have been some historic inequities in our school district, and then also across our city. I'm very familiar with the redlining and the information with City Within the City. That was one of the first books that, when I first joined the district, that was shared with me. And then prior to that, there's a book around city, and I'm not going to call the title, but it's about the industry of furniture. Thank you, Furniture City. Dr. Jones, thank you. And so there's a long history of different things that have trickled forward and people don't always realize and can be able to pinpoint those things, but that's been part of the conversation that has taken place. We have some staffing shortages. Everybody's heard of the Great Resignation, and some of this is COVID related, but some of it's other things that we have to address as a community. And then also our annual structural deficit. If you advance the slide, I'll talk about that a little bit. So currently in our district, we have approximately $4 million that, because we are at 51% occupancy of our buildings, 51% over utilization, that 49% of our buildings are not adequately being utilized. And so what that means for folks, that means that we are, we still have to pay insurance, we still have to have the heat, we still have to have the water, still have to have those things, but those buildings are not fully being utilized. And if you think about it from just a dollar and cents standpoint, to be able to remove some of those buildings and to shrink our footprint to make sure that we are right-sized, that $4 billion just on building use can possibly have impact on programming. It can have impact on how we look at staffing and be more competitive with wages and others. And so that's, kind of a pinpoint that I want to make sure that people understand. And so again, this is a issue that has not developed in the last couple of years. It's been something that has taken place over the last 15 to 20 years. And at this point, I think that we've come to a head where we kind of kick the can down the road. And if we really want to make some impact on our community and impact directly on our scholars and our families, we've come to that place of we've got to really do something. And so people might say, okay, why? And so it's the perfect storm of affordable housing. I've shared this story numerous times. I am from Minneapolis, St. Paul. My husband and I, when we moved to the area, it took us 3 years of active looking to find a home in the city of Grand Rapids. One of the commitments that I made is that I was going to live in the community. I've always lived in the communities for which I've served, and I wanted to make sure that we could find a house that we felt comfortable in, where we felt like we could I think your home should be your oasis in a lot of ways. And so it took us 3 years, and there were a couple of experiences that we had where it's very competitive. And so affordable housing is a true issue in our community, and I have resources. And so I imagine that for families and people who are just starting out, where there's resources maybe a little bit more tighter, it becomes even more challenging. And so that is an issue within our community. The other things that we have to make sure that we are addressing is the birth rate. In Kent County, for the last 10 to 12 years, we've seen a decline in our birth rate, about 800 folks that are born year over year. And so what that means is, if you look at, we're looking at our 2019 data, who was born in 2019, because those would be the young people that would be entering into schools in 2023 as 4-year-olds. And so our birth rate has declined about 800 students or 800 people per year, and that's across our county. More school options. What you need to know about that, in our county, there are 20 charter schools, 20. And if you think about Grand Rapids proper, of those 20, 12 of them reside right here in the city of Grand Rapids. And so the other districts, there are 20 districts in Kent County. There may be a couple in Kentwood, one in Wyoming, maybe one in Rockford, but many of those schools are right here in the city of Grand Rapids proper. And again, I don't say that as a negative, I'm just saying that also there's more competition with the footprint of the children that we might be able to serve. And then one of my favorites is the pandemic, right? And so if you think about it, it's like the pandemic, we're still feeling the results of that. Even though it lasted about 2.5 years, we're still not fully able to analyze the impact, not only the social and financial impact, but the emotional impacts of the pandemic. And we're still realizing that as young people have come back into schools, that there has been isolation. Mental health and wellness of folks has had huge impact, and we're seeing the results of that over time. So all that's kind of like the perfect storm of what has happened. And so you might say, what are we doing about it? Some of the things that we have been consistent with as we've had conversations with community members and others across our organization is tell us what you're going to do. And so what you see on the screen right now is called the Reimagine Dashboard, and it's specifically to address the work that's underway. Our district is 153 years of age, and so that's a lot of history. A lots of experience. Many of you may be Grand Rapids alum, or your children or cousins or colleagues are Grand Rapids alum. And so one of the things that we're committed to is lifting up those conversations that we have heard over the last 2.5 years and to create a dashboard. And this is a relatively new experience for us where we're listing up culture, because we have some culture issues that we're trying to address. And so if we speak honestly, and I think it's important to speak honestly about what is and what's not, because then you can't really necessarily address it. So around culture, around our academic programs, our fine arts, athletics, transportation is huge. I'm sure you've heard some of the concerns, or maybe you've experienced some of the concerns around transportation, food, and other areas. And so to me, I believe in you lay out the issues so that you can address it versus hiding behind it and saying there's not an issue. And so it doesn't mean that we're going to do it great every single time, but I think laying out our issues and also saying what our expectations and our goals around that and measuring how we're progress monitoring is huge. So what is the zero tax increase bond? And so this is a limited opportunity. Every 15 to 20 years, you have an opportunity to renew bonds. This is a continuation of the work that the citizens of Grand Rapids have done over the last couple of years. And so this particular bond that we're talking about will yield $5 million for our scholars, for our schools, for our communities, for our programs. Some of the things that people have shared are important to them. It's not a tax rate increase, it's a continuation of your current tax rate. We all pay taxes, it's a continuation of our current tax rate, and it's by the folks who live in the city of Grand Rapids, those property owners. So currently we pay 3.85 mils, and we will continue with that. It will, and I need to also say this, Grand Rapids has the lowest tax millage rate in our county. And so when you think about it from an equity and access point, and again, I'm gonna give my perspective of, people will say, well, in this community, they have this, and they have this, and they have this facility. And I want that for our kids. I know that our community wants that for our kids as well, but it costs. And when you look at other communities, their tax millage rate is a lot higher. And we're the largest city, but we have the lowest tax rate millage. And so if you advance the slide, I just wanna show that point. So what you see in the middle, is there a way to enlarge that a little? Grand Rapids is right in the center. If you just even hover over where Grand Rapids is. So if you look, even if you can't see it, what exactly, you can read the bar graph. Grand Rapids has the lowest tax rate in our county. And so that has an impact on how we do look at our buildings and how we are able to support programs and different things. The next two closest, I think, are Kentwood Hills and Kentwood. And Kentwood has a sinking fund as well. So when you look at what the other districts in our county have, this is an equity issue. And I need to kind of put a quarter in the meter for that. This is an equity issue. If we want things for our scholars in our community, we also have to look at how are we making sure that we are using and leveraging the resources within our community to ensure that our young people have the same things that you might see in some of those neighboring communities. All right, so you might say, what does the bond actually give us? Where does this money go? Classrooms. It goes to athletic facilities, auditoriums, technology, playgrounds and green space, safety and security. We talked a little bit about that. Food services and facilities, cafeterias and kitchens. Some of the things that I think is important, and I like to eat. I don't know if anybody else likes to eat. I like to eat. And you eat things that look good and taste good, and some of the things that we would like to imagine and envision is to have scratch kitchens for our kids, to have that farm to table experience for our young people. But again, all of those things, we have to think about how are we restructuring our systems. And so, and one of the things I want to lift up, and Dr. Brandy might speak to this a little bit as well, as we've talked about some of these things, the repair criteria is something I want to lift up for the community as well. So our repair criteria, it's not building repair, it's how do we repair and heal within our community. What I mean by that, 49507 in particular, has been overly saturated, overly where we've done lots of different things when we talk about closing buildings and programs. It's important when you look at a repair criteria, if whatever's available on one side of the city, it really shouldn't be available on the other side of the city. And so an example of that, we have many theme schools and fine arts programs on one side of the city. It should mirror that on the other side of the city, not just from an equity, or excuse me, an equality standpoint, but from an equity standpoint. And what I mean by that, it's important that our kids have multiple opportunities and multiple on-ramps to experience STEM and environmental science and fine arts and Montessori programs. And so when we talk about what we want for our children, we want them to have things that are available right in their own community, so they don't have to trace from one side of the city to the other, that they're able to have schools right there that have rigorous, relevant education right there in their own community. The other part of that, the residual impact of that, includes parents can be involved, things that are outside of my sphere of control. I don't necessarily always am able to control when parents are able, if they have access to vehicles and things, but if you have a school and a program right in your own neighborhood, you can be involved and be engaged with what's taking place with your young person right in your neighborhood, instead of trying to figure out how to get across town to go to a parent-teacher conference or to attend an event. And so that mirroring principle, what you see on one side of the city, you should see something very similar on the other side of the city. Bonds can be used for, and I talked about this a little bit, upgrades to buildings. That includes, if we're creating a community school, do we look at our facilities and land to say, how do we make this an environmental school? Or look at what people are saying that they need on this side of the city and this part of the community. It can be used to remodel buildings. It can be used to take down some buildings. And we have some old buildings, and some of our buildings, quite honestly, financially, it makes sense to take them down and rebuild versus trying to do some retrofitting of those spaces. It can be used for athletic fields, theaters, other facilities. What I appreciate about Grand Rapids Public Schools, land and buildings are values. And so we look at our land and our buildings as an asset, and it's how do we repurpose those to ensure that we're not just selling them off, but how do we repurpose those in a way that makes sense for this community for future growth? It can be used, the bond can be used for acquiring other capital expenditures or technology hardware, and then also the cost of bond insurance. And so when you think about GRPS, we have about 14,000 students. I liken it to a big cruise ship. There's nothing that happens quickly in GRPS. And if you think about a speedboat versus a cruise ship, you can take a quick right turn on a speedboat, but with larger systems, there's layers upon layers of different things. And so as we are making changes, we want to be sensitive to what are the residual impacts of some of those changes. What bonds cannot be used for, they can't be used for operating systems and software. They can't be used for training, consulting, contracts, and other supports, and they cannot be used for wages. And so I think it's important to also lift that up. They cannot be used to increase people's salaries. But I also want to lift up, if we are reducing our footprint and reducing our insurance and reducing some of our facilities, that can be used out of the general fund to have some impact on wages. The last thing that I'm going to show you is our pie chart of how we've broken down that $305 million of what we anticipate we'll be using it for. And if you look at the biggest chunk of the pie, It's specifically for buildings, but it also includes things that enrich the experience of young people, auditoriums, playgrounds, athletic fields, technology, safety and security. And so, but most of this will be used for the physical buildings to make those experiences even richer and more deserving of our young people. And the last thing I just want to say again to CLE and to the community, thank you just for allowing us to be here. I think it's important. I don't ever take this lightly. Whenever I have an opportunity to talk about the things that are important to me, I want to be able to say, I appreciate the time. I want to engage in dialogue about what we want and what we expect, and also continually engage around, as we are opening up this plan and revealing our plan, what does this look like over the next couple of years? And to remind you to vote on November 7th, if you haven't voted already.
All right, thank you. That's a lot of information. So I'm sure there are going to be a number of questions. One of the things that I want to lift up, that in 2015, under the leadership of Superintendent Neal, there was a $175 million bond that the voters passed. And I think at that time, it was about 2.1 mils or something like that. So that's one of the questions, I guess one of the things that I have, and I think many of us will ask, what's different, right? What's different this time? Because as I'm looking in my notes here, a couple of the things that money went to are very similar to what is in this bond. Aging buildings, renovate and replace aging buildings, upgrade outdated technology and improve the safety and security of for our students. So 175 million. So now this bond is asking for 305 million. So really kind of what's going to look different in terms of this whole theme of reimagine. And so I think a lot of times when we ask voters to come out, they often say, give us a reason, right? And what's going to be different. So that's a critical question. I don't know if you can address that, Dr. Wilson.
Absolutely, thank you. And so the transformation plan of 2012, 2015 was primarily about our secondary schools, our high school programs, and some of the results of that would have been Southwest Middle High School that you can see from 131. Ottawa Hills had some major renovations. Union High School had some major renovations. C.A. Frost School was built from the ground up. And so the results of that innovation were smaller high schools, more choice for young people. And we saw an increase of graduation rates overall. And I'm not saying it's exclusively, that was a direct parallel to that, but through that, there were some results of providing more choice for our secondary students. The difference between the bond of 2015 and the bond ask of 2023 includes that this is primarily around our elementary and middle school programs, and it's important if you think about what do you want. We always think about what are the outcomes that we want our young people to have, and it's that backwards planning. So we want 100% of our kids to graduate. I don't think anybody in here would say we're okay with something less than that, but then before they get to that, what does our high school experience look like? And then how does that feed in from our middle school experience? And how does that feed in from our elementary experience? And so this is about that strong articulation all the way through. And some of the components of this bond include that early childhood experience. One of the goals is to have a pre-K classroom in every elementary building. And that to me is an equity issue. There's a shortage of available pre-K, and we know that that early literacy experience has impact on how children perform, as an example. And then also having a strong articulation if you're interested in the sciences or the arts, to make sure that it's, because we have within our city, it's kind of choppy at times. And one of the things I learned as I came into the community, there is and I'm saying in air quotes, a perceived, but there's a reality around our theme schools versus our neighborhood schools. And if we talk about equity, it's important that wherever you live, it shouldn't matter. You should have a strong articulation if you're interested in the sciences or the arts. And so what this bond does is address specifically our elementary and middle school programs to make sure there is a strong articulation as young people matriculate through our system.
Okay, perfect. So the other thing is I'm looking here at this chart, and literally a super majority of the funding will go to, I think as you referenced in your presentation, building construction. We'll just say that in layman's terms. And so with that said, is there a plan to close schools? And is there a list of those schools that you are planning to close?
Yes, and so you can't shrink the footprint, of course, without closing some schools. And so we actually have currently 44 buildings that are active buildings that have children in them today. And in addition to that, we have about 12 buildings that are more support buildings, when you can think about the district office and the transportation facility and other places. And so realistically, yes, we are gonna have to close. We estimate around 8 to 10 active schools. And I think it's also important to lift up, as we are going back to that repair criteria, it's not just about closing schools and saying we're done. We wanna be sensitive to what are the long-term impacts? What have we learned from previous school closures? How do we make sure that people feel and know what they're getting? And to me, having a school that may have ceilings that are not as secure versus having a very beautiful space also feels more inviting for kids. And so to sell that story of this is what you're getting. So you might be losing this particular school, but this is what you're going to get in return, I think is really important. And as far as a list, so our board, and I want to make sure people understand this, we will be presenting our best thinking around which schools would be of benefit, and then also looking at our city from that quadrant. You know, we have 4 quadrants: northwest, northeast, southwest, and southeast. And how do we ensure from an equity standpoint that we're not over addressing one particular area of the city versus another? And then also being sensitive to our surrounding communities, because we don't want to give up so much of our footprint that young people might leave to go to other communities. And so that's a long way around saying, yes, we are working through what might be the best presentation, and we'll make sure that our community is aware of it. And so what the process will include, when we make that presentation to our board, we are committed to going back out to the community and saying, this is what this looks like. We would like to have continued feedback and dialogue, and then bringing that information back to, we've talked to different community stakeholders, and what are your thoughts? And then the board ultimately decides what is or what's not.
Yeah, one of the things I want to offer you a suggestion, and that's a suggestion, and I think when you are, because these are lives that are being impacted, and I think community voice should be at the center of that. Community, I'll say that again, community voice should be at the very center of that. So it'll be interesting to see, I know you guys are looking at this, but it will be interesting to see a list of proposed closures, right? So I think the community can get some thought, put some thought around that. The other thing that I noticed here as well, we talk about renovations, athletics, of course, that impacts students. But one of the things that I really want to lift up and underscore is, what are we doing about schools that are non-proficient? How does this millage or this bond address that issue? Another thing, we talk about academic achievement. What are we really going to do when it comes to academic achievement? what is this money, this $305 million, going to do when it comes to academic achievement, and as well as graduation rates. So I know Dr. Perry, when he was here, I believe he said that the current graduation rate for GRPS is like 67% or something. But I saw another number, it said 70-something% or what have you, right? But that's still unacceptable. That should be unacceptable to us. Michigan is in the top 10 worst schools in the country. That should be unacceptable. And so how is this money going to address that as well? Another thing I wanted to look up, it says zero tax rate increase. So we know 2015, the mills was 2.1. This is 3.8 mills. That's still money that's coming out of our pockets. So it's essentially like a flat tax, right? But we're still paying money. And so I don't like spending my money, I don't know about anybody else, on anything that's not going to be beneficial for me, my family, community, or whatever. And I'm not, putting that out there saying that this won't, but I think we have to really think about this in like really where we're going. And so I don't know if you can address that. How does this actually put a dent in academic achievement? We look at graduation rates and all of those things. And the other thing, when we look at graduation rates, again, it goes back to being proficient. Because you can graduate folks, but are they proficient, right? Can they read? Can they write? And some of those things, right? And so it's just critically important. So I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Okay, and so I took some notes because you kind of put a couple of different questions within there, and so I want to make sure I clarify a couple of things. Going to graduation rates, we are at 81, and it might be 81.5%, which is above the state, because the state is at 80, and where you and I will completely agree, I want to be at 100%. And so I think we should have a goal of 100% because I don't feel like we should ever feel like anything less, because that has impact on young people. So I'm certainly not suggesting that 81.5% is where we want to stay. We want to continue to grow in that. Unpacking community voice, absolutely. I think it is important when we talk about engagement that we do listen to multiple voices and multiple perspectives, and kind of combine all of those different things, because as many voices that we might even have here, those voices are each individually important, but then we have to make decisions around what's going to be good for the whole, and then also making sure that we bring that forward in a very transparent way of how we're making decisions and what people are saying. And so I think it's a very iterative process. And if you think about the conversations that we've had over the last 2 years, it hasn't been, we've committed to, it's not a one and done. We've come back multiple times to have various conversations in large groups and small groups, surveys, and people outside of us with focus groups to allow for multiple perspectives, because I do realize with something significant such as this, you can't just ask people one time and think, okay, we've done it. It's more than just checking the box. It really is about how do we get a comprehensive voice and then filter through some of those things and see what are the themes that are arising from that. The 2.1 mils, because that does predate me, and I want to make sure, and I certainly will lean into our team members, and I have Mr. Helmholtz, he'll have to speak to the 2.1 mils versus 3.85. I would assume inflation, but I don't want to speak to that, so I'll allow him to do that. And then with respect to proficiency, yes, when you think about proficiency, one of the things that you look at for different grade spans, proficiency is a couple of different metrics. It might be around how you're performing around standardized assessments at the elementary and middle school level, and then proficiency at the secondary level at the high school. It may include how you're performing on national standardized assessments, but it also includes graduation rates. And so comparing like an elementary to a high school, it's apples to Tonka trucks. Mr. Hummel, do you want to speak to the mill question? Did I answer all the other questions? Because I want to make sure. Okay.
All right, good evening, everyone. John Helmholt, C4PR, formerly with GRPS for about 15 years. I worked on that 2015 campaign, and I've worked on many political campaigns and ballot proposals. In 2015, the $175 million for the transformation plan was the 2.1. The remaining part of that 3.85 was approved by voters in 2004 when then Superintendent Burt Blakey took that question. It was, I believe, $155 million at that time. And so what we have is a limited opportunity to raise $305 million without increasing tax rates. So the property taxpayers have been paying the 3.85 since 2015. When the voters said yes to that $175 million bond, that tax rate went to 3.85. So in essence, what this is like a renewal. You're already paying it, it's built into your mortgage, in most cases, it's escrowed. This will maintain that same rate over another 20 plus years and raise a historic $305 million. There will never be another time to be able to raise this kind of funds without increasing tax rates because that 2004 tax rate would drop off, which would obviously lower taxes. So I mean, there is that side of it, but we're also looking at it from an opportunity side. Grand Rapids Public Schools has more than $450 million in deferred maintenance. And so this $305 million will go a long way to addressing all the different issues and concerns, as well as being done through a lens toward looking at addressing the historic inequities, particularly in the 40507.
Okay, what we're going to do is open it up for questions. I'm going to have Aaron monitor the mic.
Anyone who has questions? I know Ms. Butler has some questions. All the way down to the side. And I think we have comments on the screen as well.
Hi, Dr. Roby, you mentioned that there probably would be 8 to 10 schools that you're looking at the possibility of closing. You also mentioned that there's a problem with transportation. With you and your staff, what are you going to be looking at when you're replacing, when you're closing those schools with replacing transportation for those students living within or near those schools?
Great question. And so with transportation, our transportation system is quite complex. And so we have students who might be living in the southeast side who may attend a school northeast, and how our transportation system is currently set up. They might have to catch a bus from southeast, go to, and I'm just naming schools, I'm just as an example, to Campus Elementary to catch another bus to go to Westwood, which is northwest, to go to CA Frost. And then when you look at the experience for that scholar, they may be on a bus for an hour and a half. To me, that's a problem. And because an hour and a half one way, that's a lot of lost instructional time. And so part of our repair criteria is ensuring that we have whatever's offered. And I love that there's some programs that people are like, I want to go to this particular school. If it's offered in one area of the city, we do need to mirror that on the other side of the city so that people don't have to go as far with that. And then also by shrinking our footprint of the number of schools, that helps to alleviate some of the bus runs related to that. I want to make sure that you asked something else too, and I didn't write it down, so I want to make sure I answered.
I just asked what we're going to do in terms of making sure those schools that you close, that the students have
Thank you.
safe and secure transportation so that they don't have to be on a bus for an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Yes.
One way, and then they got to do the same thing going back home. That's an awful lot of time that students can get into trouble and all kinds of things if they don't have rides that it's closer to home so that they don't have to be displaced for that amount of time. I mean, for a young kid, you're talking about 3 hours basically a day, and that's too long.
That is absolutely too long.
And I would hope that you would take that into consideration and try to draw some grounds where it won't take that long. Because I would hate to see any of my family, having to go, and I do have young nieces that would have to transfer that far to get into school.
Absolutely, and so it's the ripple effect of long bus rides, that's lost instructional time, that also hinders a young person's ability to maybe participate in extracurricular activities, whether it be athletics or sports, or, athletics, sports, same thing, fine arts or things like that. And so we want to make sure that every young person whatever you see in one area of the city, you're able to see in the other area of the city. The other thing that as we are looking at what is the best way to do this is to make sure that people have choice. I'm a firm believer in choice from the standpoint of, I don't want to say school A is closing, and so everybody who goes to school A has to go to school B. I think it's important to say that school A may be closing, and in your footprint, here's a choice of school B, and here's a choice of school C. School C has this level of experiences and access, and these are the programs at school B. And so that's also a part of the plan. And so we really are trying to, and it's taken some time to build a comprehensive plan. I won't mislead and say it'll fix everything, because we know in public education and societally, there's always going to be things. But I think we're committed to trying to address issues along the way, and then also making sure that the plan is flexible enough. So whatever we decide in 2023, that if we need to make an adjustment in 2026 because current conditions have changed, that we are malleable and able to make those adjustments.
Questions?
Thank you, Dr. Brophy. Thank you, Brother Jackson, for this time together. A couple quick questions. One, I salute all the work that's been done thus far. My question is centered around this capacity. When we look at the matrix that was lifted up for this allocation for $305 million, what went into that design? Especially when we see, of course, the $233 million for the renovations, and then only $7 million for technology, especially when we went through all the COVID. Then the second question, follow-up, is just what strategies are being used by the district in order to try to make the district more appealing to our community, especially when we've seen a decrease in enrollment since the last time in which this transpired back in 2015, or approximately about 3,000 or so students. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So from a capacity standpoint, when we talk about $305 million, it's over the period of 7 or 8 years, and so it comes in 3 tranches. And so once our voters decide if they are going to support this, the first tranche of that money will be in 2024, and that will include a plan of 2024 through 2026. The next tranche, and I'm using loose time frames, right? 2026 through 2028, and then 2028 through 2030. And so this will have some impact over the next 7 years, realistically. And so we need to also decide, as we are, whatever money, and I'm assuming a third, what can we do with 105 or 100 million, the first cycle, second cycle, third. And that's also a part of our timeline and plan that we want to make sure that we are considering. With respect to our strategic plan and what are we doing as a district, there's a couple of different things. We do have a strategic plan that we enacted a year and a half ago, and it has some of those tenets around recruitment and retention, academic programming, and other things. And so some of the things that we're doing around recruitment and retention, we have different initiatives and partnerships where we're incentivizing recruitment of teachers, where we have done recruitment with a signing bonus, similar to what other districts are doing. We also are committed to doing a compensation study, because I won't say money is everything, but we can't pretend money is not a thing. And so it's important to ensure, that we're competitive, that we look at how are we stacking up against some of our neighboring districts, and what are the resources and supports that we are able to offer to make ourselves more appealing. And we've even talked about being good stewards of our resources. We have buildings, and how do we utilize those buildings and repurpose buildings that we might not be using for a teacher space? And an example of that is, how many people have heard of like the police officer next door, the firefighter next door, or the teacher next door programs? In some of those large cities, I don't want to say Denver, and I might not have the right city, they actually have a teacher house where that's a recruitment strategy. So those young people who are just graduating from colleges and universities, as they are trying to get started, the districts, those urban districts, because it's typically an urban district that's able to do some of those things, will allow staff who sign on to live in a teacher house at a reduced rate, or even consider, if people stay in the district at a certain percentage of time, helping them secure their first home by giving a certain amount of a down payment on a home. We're not at that point yet, but those are some of the things that we are exploring. Did I answer? I want to make sure I answered all of your questions.
What about also tackling school enrollment of students?
Oh, thank you. Enrollment of students, thank you. And so that is always, competition, I think, is healthy. And also, I think, from a standpoint of how do you get people to come to your district, offer a better product, right? I mean, it's like, what are our programs? Some things that you have seen in our district over the last 6 months to a year, we are trying to tell our story better about how we are offering different programs, lifting up different things that are taking place across the district. And we've been very intentional about not just lifting up our specialty schools, but also our community-based schools and the programs that are taking place within those. And then also looking at the offerings. I think it's really important to, my son, I think I shared this story before. My youngest son, played in the band, and he played in the band from second grade all the way through marching band in college. And for him, he could care less about school. He went to college because his daddy and I were like, you got to go to college. But the hook was band. And so the thread all the way through was that strong articulation of, he had the band experience at the elementary level, in middle school and high school as an example. And so when you think about programming, how do we make sure that we're able to offer different programming across our city, and it's not just at certain schools, that if young people, and I've heard, we need to have a marching band. We do. I would love to have a marching band, but it can't start in high school. It has to start in elementary, when they're developing the fundamentals around music and music theory and getting to play. I don't know if you guys remember the recorders. Those instruments are horrible, but all of those things to get them interested in that, and that's for the arts and different things. So looking at programmatic pieces, looking at our enrichment things, what are the wraparound supports that we are able to offer, and our partnerships with local colleges. GRCC is one of the ones that we have a strong partnership with, but making sure that our young people know, if you come to GRPS, these are the experiences that you'll be able to have, and telling that story very well, and making sure that it's not just hidden for those who know how to seek out information, but just making it very visible and transparent. I think there's, I'm sorry.
Thank you for hosting this. This is so important for us to have in our community. Actually, Dr. Roby, you have answered most of the questions I was going to ask. So I just want to add my comment. I am a proud GRPS parent. Both of my daughters graduated from GRPS. My oldest went to Michigan free because she was on honor roll with the program that they had, and she is also graduated from Duke. That is a GRPS education. And my youngest just graduated from Western, again, that's the Broncos. I just want to say that is a GRPS education. Keep doing the good work that you're doing. Thank you.
I'm a Bronco brand too. I I think I probably sold parking tickets somewhere.
Hi, Dr. Roby. Hi. You mentioned there's gonna be 8 to 10 schools closing. Are those schools gonna be elementary, or is there gonna be a high school closing as well?
So we are committed to not closing high school programs. There may be some movement of high school programs, but the programs will not be shuttered. And primarily the schools that we are looking to make some movements around our elementary and our middle school programs.
And I just want to let you know, inequities you talked about, you mentioned, I'm one of those 68 of South High, and we do meet twice a month.
Okay. At the donut shop.
Margie's Donuts, and we have breakfast at New Beginnings on Michigan.
I only got invited to the donuts. I never got invited to Margin or to the New Beginnings.
Hi, Dr. Roby.
Hi.
Of the 44 schools that you're speaking of, you mentioned, as Kathy already said, 8 to 10 active schools. What areas? Because I know you have to by now know the names of the schools that you're going to close. And when we talk about busing, and we're talking about rebuilding, I'm just wondering if they can be bused in as opposed to our kids being bused out. And how come we can't have some type of buildings, new buildings, or extension of buildings within the Grand Rapids area, instead of our children always going outward instead of inward, and some of their children come in. My second question, our stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? What stakeholders are we speaking of? If I can get an answer to those 2 questions, I would appreciate it.
Sure. So our stakeholders has been community members, it's been parent groups, it's been teaching staff, it's been scholars, it's been people who come to our board meetings. So it's been a cross section across our community. We've also met with special interest groups. We've met with African American pastors, Latino pastors. We've met with Urban Core Collaborative, today NAACP, Urban League. And so it's been a cross section of different groups as far as stakeholders to answer that question. And then when you're asking about the buildings across the district, we are looking to make sure that it won't be an overemphasis on this side of the city, because historically, what I have discovered, and I'm saying what our team has discovered, there has been, when schools have closed, it has been apparent that it's been more impacted on the southeast side of the city. And so there is an emphasis of how do we help rebuild, because our southeast side of the city, when we look at demographics and our heat index, and what heat index is the number of children that are available to attend, this is really the largest side of our population. And so being sensitive to that, but then that's important that we reinvest in this particular area of the city and not just pull away. So there's a concerted effort around making sure that it's not just one side of the city, that it's across, and then where is the reinvestment? And there is a major emphasis around reinvestment in the southeast quadrant. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat.
Okay.
I'll wait and see.
Okay, that's good.
I just want to say, real quick, with respect to stakeholders, I think it's really important that we listen to, or that you guys listen to your stakeholders on all issues, right? And so we know that there were a number of changes, administrative changes at the administrator level that many stakeholders, what I would consider stakeholders in this community, did not totally disagree with. And they felt like their voices were not heard. And they didn't understand those changes that was made. So I just want to underscore that when these critical issues are coming up, And it's not just about passing a millage, but it's about a variety of other different issues. When stakeholders come to the table, it is critically important to listen to their voices on all levels and all issues.
Thank you, Dr. Roby, for coming tonight. I have 2 questions right now. I have some other questions, but I have a whole bunch of questions, but thank you for coming. When you talk about closing of schools, it is vitally important what Clea just said in terms of keeping the community involved. I think one of the things that our 49507 is really concerned about is that we have not been included in a lot of decisions that have been made. So when you get ready to close the schools, make sure that that the community is not an afterthought. This is what we're gonna do, because I can tell you, the community will be very, very upset that they have not been brought along as much as you possibly can. I know you have a board, and I know that there's policy and everything like that. I understand that, but as much as you can, we need as much information about the closing of the Grand Rapids Public Schools, so parents are being brought along. Otherwise, there's a lot of, there will be all kinds of disagreements in the community. I'm a graduate of South High School in 1961. There was someone else in the room, I won't call their name, but they also graduated in 1961. My other question is, how can, you talked about closing the schools, can they be saved in any way by using, say, their community groups that might want to do something in some of those schools? Is that any possibility?
So thank you, Ms. James. So to respond to the first part of your statement, yes, I think it's important that we do include voice. And also, and here's always the hard part with that, is that listening and taking in voice, sometimes still decisions have to be made. And doesn't mean that people were not listened to. But your point and Mr. Jackson's point is well taken, that yes, we are committed to making sure that we have engaged authentically with folks. And as a system, there's always room for improvement. So I'm not gonna pretend like, well, we've done it and that's it. No, there's always ways to continually engage with voice, and also coming back and saying, this is what we heard you say, and this is where we're at. I think that's also an important part of communication. With respect to, can the buildings be repurposed? Part of our reimagined plan is, what does that look like? And so, as an example, and I've learned, so my background is teaching and learning and administration. I have learned in this last 2 years quite a bit about facilities that I didn't necessarily know. And so one of the learnings that I've had is that the building that has been shuttered for 3 years has to be brought up to current conditions. Yes, it's like all those things. So you can't just say, I'm gonna, paint a wall and do, it's like whatever those current criteria is. And so it becomes also, is it cost effective to keep a building online and in its physical condition? Or is it a way to be repurposed? Or does it make more sense to level it and build something else? And so those are the things that we have to consider. The last thing I will also say is that our board has been very consistent in how do we become, and this goes back to our district strategic plan, with how do we become a resource for our community, because that was one of the things that has been an outcome of conversations with the community of how can we repurpose buildings. And so we've heard things such as, can it be housing? Can it be community centers? What does that look like? And then the issue becomes, well, then who's going to manage it? And so I think our board is very interested in engaging in those conversations, but then also what does that look like and what is the value add to the community overall? So your point is well taken, and I know I have one of my board members who's sitting in the back that's also engaged in this conversation as well. So we do want to make sure that we're just not, unless the building is just not safe, and there are a couple of buildings that we have that really just aren't safe, and the retrofitting, it becomes cost neutral to try to retrofit something where it might be cheaper to bulldoze it and build something else.
Awesome. Hi, Dr. Roby.
Hi.
So I'm here as just like a community member and also a GRPS alum from Innovation Central. Also as a sister to some of my siblings that are currently in Grand Rapids schools as well. I was interested in just learning a little bit more about the compensation study that you were talking about and sort of if there's any specific timeline that would happen with. I know that right now with the opportunity, I know the bond wouldn't be able to like technically fund that, but it'd be like an opportunity to maybe reallocate funds and see what's going on with that. And I know there was also some huge like working condition and compensation changes when they started to outsource over to West Michigan Janitorial. And I know also there's opportunities with like game transportation, their drivers as well. And so I was just wondering, and then my last piece on this is, we know that our teachers and staff's working conditions are our students' learning conditions. And facilities are a really important part of that as well. And so I was wondering if there was a timeline and sort of like a method to also bring that up. And especially as Grand Rapids competes with like other school districts right now too.
So with respect to thank you for that question. So with respect to the compensation study, in any healthy organization, you really should do a compensation study every 3-4 years, because what's current today will be completely obsolete in 2 years. It's like the moment you take your car off the lot, it's already old, right? And so with organizations such as school districts, where we are union shopped, we are bound by that negotiated contract with our teachers union and our SEIU, which is typically our support union. And those are things that we look to. There's a cycle of either every 2 years or 3 years, unless both sides agree to go into bargaining again and looking at things. But I think it is important that we do have a study, and our last study was in 2021, and that was, I came in July of 2020, and made sure that by 2021 we began a compensation study to kind of be more competitive, and we did see some increases in salaries with our neighboring districts for like positions. And so the compensation study would not happen until 2024. And that would typically, it's about a 6-month process because you're collecting from other districts and depending on how they share or not share information. With respect to kind of our external partners, and you mentioned West Michigan Janitorial and Dean, the hard part is, and then I would say this, I believe everybody should have a living wage. I have never been a believer in, because this is your experience or your degree, you should be able to have a living wage. I think that is an equity issue. I think that's a human rights issue. And I say that I come from I am a second generation college grad. And so I say that to say, not that I have this long history and this long pedigree. My grandparents, my mother's parents were sharecroppers. And so my mother and her sister, they had 12 children. My mother was number 12 and her sister number 11. Those are the only two that my grandparents could send to college. And when I say send, that's all they did. They sent them. They had no idea what it took. And so I believe in the power of education. I believe in the power of resources. And I also believe in the power of an honest day's work for an honest wage. Unless you get, I don't respect folks hitting little old ladies over the head, taking their pocketbooks. I don't respect that. I respect that if you are going to work, you should be able to sustain yourself. Having said that, I also understand in an industry, I am a separate entity from those two businesses that you listed, just like I'm a separate industry from Coca-Cola or the Jeep dealership or whatever. There is limited ways to kind of navigate how they pay their employees because they are a private industry. Certainly we can say and ask that, yes, you need to be paying your employees a living wage, but I can't dictate that. My sphere of influence and control is really with the things that are in my house, which is teachers, the staff that we hire. And so we are always willing to advocate for that, but also understand that there are limitations to what that looks like as a separate entity. In a private business, I can't dictate how they pay their employees or what that looks like for them.
Hi, my name is Kareem Scales, and I'm a GRPS parent and concerned citizen. I don't have a question, but I just wanted to revisit the conversation around repurposing vacant buildings. So I'm not sure if you all are familiar, but there's an organization out in Detroit called Life Remodel, and they are doing just that. They are revitalizing and repurposing school buildings to directly provide wraparound services that community members, parents, and students need, providing access to job trainings and a number of other things. So I just wanted to raise that as we're looking for solutions. Check out Life Remodel. I'm sure they'd be willing to explore potential partnerships here in Grand Rapids.
Thank you for that. And I will also add, as we are looking to repurpose buildings, one of the things that I am asking this community and those who are in the audience or online, we want to make sure that as we are looking for those different, that innovation and creativity, how do we ensure that those smaller companies, BIPOC companies, get a seat at the table and just really being intentional. And again, I can't say you'll get a contract because that's not my role, but to make sure that we provide information so that people know that these are some of the contracts that may be available and would you be interested in it. And so we are definitely very committed. I know our board has been clear that Grand Rapids first, and then also a special emphasis around small businesses and businesses that are being led by people of color.
Okay, I want to just acknowledge a couple of folks in the room. We got Pastor Smith from Messiah Missionary Baptist Church. Thank you for coming out this evening, brother. Also, Pastor Smith, the first community in the church. Commissioner Emeritus Robert Womack, and Kent County Commissioner Lisa Oliver King. And thank all of you for coming out. Then we'll have a couple more questions.
Board member, we have a board member.
Oh, sorry, yeah, Kimberly Williams, in the back, Fairbanks Public School President, Board President. Did I miss anyone else? And also thanks for all of our trustees for coming out as well. Former, yeah. So we got a couple more questions. We know we are out of time. We're a little over an hour, and then we'll wrap it up.
Thank you for being here, Superintendent. Two quick questions. My first question is, are there any oppositions to the bond proposal that you've heard or have been in conversation with? So I'm curious about that. And then the second question is of the presentation that you shared and everything that you talked about. What are 2-3 talking points that as community members we can take from today and engage with other members of the community? Yes. Oh, perfect.
So we'll make sure that you get a handout. And there, overall, and one of the things that I've learned about the community, people love this district, they love the young people, and there is general support as we've talked to people, as we've had conversations, as we've done door-to-door knocking, and even as we've done some polling.
I imagine that there might be some opposition. We are the only item on the ballot, and that can be both a positive and a negative. The positive is that it's clear. It's like, it's either yes or no, and it's not muddled with other things. And the negative, like if we were to do this time next year, if that opportunity presented itself, we would be in a presidential election, and I think that that would kind of have some influence on how people are, you know, we are as a community quite polarized in our views, and that kind of clouds the judgment. But we do have some flyers and some talking points around what the bond is and what it isn't, so thank you for that.
And the presentation is online.
Yes. You had a question, Mr. Warren?
Oh, yes. First, I gotta give a shout out to Ellen James, even though she's not on that board at GRC anymore, she opened doors for us, so we gotta give our flowers to our legends while they're still here. I'm Commissioner Robert S. Womack, and I also wanna say we should give it up for you for being our superintendent and let people know how much I respect you. And I just want people to know how much I respect you, and the questions I would have for any superintendent to continue to push the needle forward for our children. When we talked about the marching band, it seems like a small thing, but it's very major. And it points back to the question, who are the stakeholders? And a lot of meetings when we go to in other communities and neighborhoods, they don't have to ask who's the stakeholders, because whenever they walk into a meeting, not about you, but you know, whether that's city, school, administrators, they're catered to, so they feel like they're the stakeholders. Things appear when we lose schools, we have schools closed down. At the same time, we have new schools opening in other zip codes outside of 4907. We have other schools opening, we have themed schools opening. I've gone to superintendents before and asked why some of those themed schools weren't put in Ottawa to increase the enrollment in Ottawa school, because we got such a beautiful building there. So when we talk about the marching band, and we look at Local, who has a $48 million a year educational fund, but the Lowell parents would not ever accept not having a marching band. Byron Center would not accept it. In Grand Rapids, with our budget being over $200 million, how could we in our community accept not having a marching band? I won't go into the intricacies of the communicable skills that you get from learning these instruments, the togetherness, the other factors outside of school that can take a young person's mind and continue to direct it with all due knowledge that it starts at home, it starts with the parents too. But as the school being a part of the village, I know arts and music are very important. So that would be my question. How can we accept not having a marching band? What can we do to get that going? Some of the other things that stakeholders want to hear. And thank you for handing this out, because I was just hoping that we did have an idea of what the bonding is going, that we can take with us for this bond proposal that I support and any others. But when it comes to that marching band, I just think a lot of times we hear the things we need written off so easy. And I only brought that one up because it was mentioned tonight. And I'll wrap it up with, I'm asking that as we see new schools built in new zip codes, that where African-American stakeholders have been the ones that have been the backbone of this school system since white flight in the 60s after the riots. Thank you.
All right, I appreciate that, Mr. Womack. So, with respect to the marching band, that's going to actually take time. And one of my comments around that is, to get to a marching band, you have to do that backwards planning around that and that backwards experience. And so our current high schoolers, if they've not had consistent music theory, then we've got to start building it back in our middle school and then also in our elementary. And so, because marching band, to your point, it just doesn't happen. It's through years of experience. And so even today, I would say we're about probably 10 years away from a strong marching band, because we need to look at who are our current second and third graders and then having that build up through time. And so as an example of where you might have interrupted services, if every school doesn't have a music teacher, that has impact. And so as an example, if I have a teacher who only has 2 preps or 2 classes at one school, and then he or she has to travel to another school to have 2 preps or 2 classes, and then a different school to have 2 preps or 2 classes, you don't build consistency of that program piece. And so it's important that you have classes where a music teacher can build a strong articulation all the way through. So that elementary music foundational teacher is able to have 5 classes, and then that soft handoff to that middle school music program, and they're in partnership, they do. And in education, we get really jargony, where we talk about professional learning communities or PLCs. And so it's important that just like when you think about like sports, the football program, it depends on the middle school program, and also depends on like rocket football. It's the same kind of concept. It has to have a strong articulation, so when as students go through a program, the coaches are talking to each other. The music teachers are talking to each other so that they know what their skill sets are and how to continue to develop them. And so that is our goal, to have those experiences and exposure, because I do believe that kids typically, and I would love if somebody said, I can't wait to go to school and do algebra. I would love that. I would love that. But if the hook is art, music, athletics, and then they also are interested in the sciences, I don't care what the hook is. I'm about educating children. And so if the hook is some other kind of entity, then we need to do that. We have to build both of those. So not only just a strong instructional program, but also being considerate of how do we have those enrichment experiences that make school fun.
Hi, one more question, sorry. Thank you for being here, Superintendent and the NAACP for organizing this event. My name is Sylvia Nyambungu. I'm a refugee from Rwanda who has been residing in Grand Rapids for the past 12 years. And I've also worked in the community as an interpreter, a community organizer, a community connector. And the state of Michigan is one of the top states for settling refugees in the country. And Grand Rapids is one of the cities where most of the refugees are being brought. And GRPS is providing us support and services, which I'm very grateful. But I'm curious to hear, and especially with this like reimagined GRPS plan and other things that you're working on right now, Superintendent, you and your team, what the plan you guys are for the thousands of students that are coming from a traditional education background compared to the US, who are learning English, start to learn English from high school. High school is the first time they're probably learning English or in class, or learning English from, in middle school, like what the plan is, because from my experience in the community, there's a lot of bullying, there's a lot of just issues that I'm seeing people graduating, by the time they're graduating high school, they're not motivated to want to continue, but also not equipped with the skills. And I've went to Union High School, I met with some of the ESL teachers there, they're doing their best, but there's a lot of limited resources that they're dealing with, and just a lot of things. So I know I'm here with Grace, and I know many other people in the community who are ready to like join in and provide you support with stakeholders, but I'm also curious to hear how far you guys are and what you're anticipating for the future as well.
So thank you for that question. In the city of Grand Rapids, I think there's over 100 languages spoken, and representing about 120 different countries. And so we are a very diverse, very layered city. And sometimes people look at that as we're saying it like that's an excuse. I think it's important to give that as a foundation. And to your point is when you have young people who come into as a newcomer into the community, and this may be their first consistent educational experience, that has impact too. And so when you think about a young person who enters high school, but this is their very first time, or middle school, first time in a structured educational environment because they're coming from places where maybe their education was interrupted. We have to make sure that we provide those resources and supports for them. And so we're responsible, of course, for the instructional part, but then also connecting them and their families to other resources within the community. And that includes different agencies, and then also with our ESL teachers, making sure that they're appropriately trained. Some of the things that we are doing as our community continues to change, we do offer our current staff opportunities to go back and get additional certification for ESL training. And ESL, again, because in education we have all these different, the alphabet soup. English as a second language training to make sure that we have a breadth of folks who know how to teach English and also understand the cultures of the folks that might be coming through their doors. But then also those partnerships with the Hispanic Center, the Rwandan Center, and other places. It's equally important because it's not just about the language, it's also about the culture and making sure that we're sensitive to that. The last thing I will say is, as we are trying to ensure that we meet the needs of many, is being sensitive to food. We have in one part of our, one particular school that's coming in my mind, there is some things on food, and they have halal chicken, and I might not be saying it the correct way, but it's specifically to make sure that, you know, because they, the large percentage of our students that come through that door may not eat typical meat products, and being sensitive to that. And so it's all those things, and then that growth mindset around how do we continue to learn and grow in our community, and making sure that the services, you have impact and intent. And so when you think about it, we intend to do something, but also comparing it to the impact, how is it landing? And so we can be very well-intentioned, but if it's not landing for people the right way, then we've missed the mark. And so being really sensitive to that.
We have a question, Commissioner, in the back, real quick.
Okay.
Good evening, thanks, Dr. Roby and Phil Jackson, classmate from elementary school. But I'm a graduate from Owl Hills, and so is my brothers, one of my sons and whatnot. So I love the community, the GRPS, and as I made my way over here earlier, to me what stood out too of what you were mentioning, the place that come to help with decisions as far as the funding. What I realized even when I was in school, that the teachers seemed to be on top of things, that what we learned. But when my son, who's 31 right now, was I went to the school one time because he was complaining about he couldn't get to class on time, and I wanted to find out why. Some of the teachers were telling me that they weren't certified. They could teach, but there was some stuff they said, well, we ain't gonna do this today because we don't know this part. So I guess when I hear you say sign-in bonuses, is it that when teachers are for math or algebra or whatnot, if as we're moving forward, if they are for sign-in bonus to stay on top of things, to be certified, that they will get an extra, is it possible to put the money to get an extra bonus if they're staying up to date with what, because otherwise if you're not up to date, how are the kids gonna learn if the teacher's saying they don't know? So in the midst of that, besides that, I do believe with the music, that I had in elementary school, violin. We played violins first, fourth grade, or with recorders, as you said. We have recorders, so kids learned how to read music. So then we had violins, and then all of the instruments was incorporated in fifth grade. But I guess too, when you say it might be about music teachers in different schools, the music teacher came to the school. So even if the schools are being built and they have a music room, the teachers, if they came on certain days, it doesn't have to mean that the music teacher has to stay at that school. Maybe they can move around, that the music teacher can move around like that's thought or whatnot. But yeah, that was more so of the music and about keeping the teachers more up to date because, yeah.
So, okay, let me explain. Thank you for that question. And so the way in which teaching, licensure, and certification works, every teacher has to be certified in the areas and the content that they teach. And you have to be recertified. You have 5 years where you have your initial licensure. So once you graduate, you pass whatever the state assessment is, then you're licensed and certified to teach in that content area. And then over the next 5 years, you have to get 125, I think, and I might be wrong in the amount of continuing education credits over 5 years. And so when I'm talking about the bonuses, it's not for certification because that's something that's required of teachers. The signing bonuses are people who come to our district. And so they're coming from other places or they're new teachers. So, and also the same thing for administrators. So as an administrator, you have to do the same thing to keep your certification. You have to renew it every 5 years. Otherwise, you're not able to do your job. Same thing for nurses and doctors. The other part of your question related to music, what I was saying is to build a robust program, it's important that there's consistency. And so if you have teachers who are moving around, if you think about a school that might have 400 kids, if they only have 2 class periods where they're offering music, you're not really able to build a strong music program because only those 2 classes might have that. And so it's important that if you have 400 young people, that all the young people are able to experience that. And so that's what I was saying, is that we want to have some consistency within our programming offering so that you can start to build robust programming all the way through.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I have one question I forgot to ask about security, so I'm gonna ask that. But I was gonna say, with music, when I began to rap, my teachers began to tell me that it wouldn't be around in 5 years. And I was great fanfare from my class and support from my students that I was co-students with, but from the teachers, I became the AB student that lost his mind. Always told I picked the wrong thing. But taking music in school, which I've only had 1 music class, the one thing I want to say about music, hip hop became a $1 billion industry. The music supplies many, many jobs. Some kids go to school not wanting to be President Obama. They go to school wanting to score for films and music films. So I think it's a core class. I also know that music turned me on to math because to understand the bass clef, the bass staff, and the clef staff, and the treble staff, and to quantize my drums, into 8th notes and 16th notes, I had to totally understand math and fractions more to be the best at what I do. When I came back to Grand Rapids, one of the main reasons I moved back from New York is because I drove back and I listened to FM radio in Detroit, Ohio. Get to Grand Rapids, they listen to AM. I started telling leaders we have to have FM. It's unacceptable in 2006 to be the only Black city with this Black population listening to AM. They said it can't happen. They gave us all the reasons. They sounded real good. But I went on to make the first Black FM station. So when I look at this thing doing the marching band, I'm like, we just gotta have it. There's no need for these kids to go to a historical Black school and not be able to look at the marching band and say, well, if I wanted to be a part of it, or like I just jumped off Mars, I didn't know they had Black marching bands. And I'm not blaming you, because you inherited this mess. We argue with other people not to destroy our great music program that produced the DeBarges and Al Green, and it's a trophies of pride for us. So I'm just here to tell you, as the new superintendent, we take it serious. We need that. Thank you for all you've been doing. Thank you for hearing me out. My last question was a question that I get from others, and it is important, and that's about the security. We know it starts at home. It starts at home. This gun thing starts in the community, so we got to do our part. But what is GRPS doing to ensure that these parents that are sending their kids there, aren't harmed by, guns coming into school, your new procedures? Thank you.
All right, Thank you, Mr. Womack, that was quite a bit. And so I'll try to make sure to answer the first part as you're talking about music and experience. I think innovation always comes from children, right? It's like when I hear people say, oh, we've got to prepare kids for the 21st century. And if you think about it, our children have only lived in the 21st century. It's all of us who have come from the previous century. This is the only century they know. And so part of development of young people, and my belief is, it's not how I see the world right now, but how do I create a space that allows them to see the world in the future. And so it's not just about current jobs that we can make. And if you think about going back 20 years, if you had said, what is an influencer or a blogger? Or it's like, those are things that have come through this century. And so we want to create a space. Education should always be about creating spaces that allow children to think beyond their current conditions and not be limited in their thinking, right? With respect to safety and security, that is an ongoing issue. It is not a simple issue. It's something that we all have to be vigilant about. And as everybody knows, we had a couple of incidents last school year where young people brought guns to school. And it didn't happen because people think, oh, was it at the high school? This was at elementary and middle school. And so that speaks to a bigger issue because high schoolers have a little bit more freedom to kind of do different things, but an elementary student who had access to a gun spoke volumes. And I think it's about creating spaces where kids feel safe to tell or if something's not right. And then also our adults, it is our job to create spaces where people feel safe, where it's not that philosophy, snitches, what is it? Snitches get stitches, and we add the fun part and end up in ditches. So it's important that we create a space where kids feel safe, to keep everybody safe. From a structural standpoint, we are doing currently an audit of our buildings around where are those opportunities and making sure that we have very tight structures around, do we want to have metal detectors in every building, and what does that look like, and how are people appropriately trained? But the thing that people think about, and I have to say this just very publicly, you think about a school building, there's no way that one metal detector or two metal detectors is going to solve the issue because there's too many entry points in a school, and you have to have somebody there to see it at that time that somebody might come in. And so it's important that, yes, it offers one level of safety, but then there's other things that we have to have in place. It's also important to make sure that our staff is trained on what to do. And so we can't just always assume that it's going to be a weapon. There might be other things that cause harm, and we have to make sure that staff are well prepared and know how to, just like what you practice with the fire drill or tornado drill, you've got to practice for different emergencies. Not that you know exactly what to do, but at least you've talked about it and done some things around that. And so those things are taking place. In addition to that, we are also have been hosting and will continue to host forums with our families, additional trainings with staff and community members who want to know what are some things to look for and have discussions. And again, it's all of those things. And it's not just one thing that will address it, it's multiple things. And then finally, where I really do need parents to kind of weigh in and to kind of be a part of this, is to have conversations with your kid. What's going on in school? Do you feel safe? If you don't feel safe, why not? And who have you told? And then parents advocate and say, my son has come and said that this is taking place. Are you aware of it so that it can be addressed?
One question in the comments.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this just popped up. Why are Black students being denied access into their neighborhood schools on the southwest side of the city?
I don't know exactly what is being referenced there. And so specifically with our Southwest High School, this is what I'm assuming. With our Southwest High School, it is a dual language immersion program. And so with a dual language immersion program, you have to be credentialed and to be able to speak, write, and understand in that second language for not only just core content areas, math, science, social studies, and English, but then also to be able to pass assessments in those languages. And so at the elementary, so if you're not a native speaker, my native language is English, and so if I were to enter into a dual immersion program and not speak the language, my entry point is really at the elementary level, and that's where you build those skills. And so if you think about an articulation, in kindergarten up through second grade, it's about 100% in Spanish, and then they start doing the transition of Spanish to English when you're teaching both in Spanish and in English because of state assessments, because students are tested in English. When you think about the NCAs and other state assessments, they're tested in English. But at the high school level, if you're not proficient in that language, that's not really an entry point, because then they're being set up for failure, because content is primarily taught in that the Spanish language, because the goal of a dual immersion school is to have a seal of biliteracy. And how the seal of biliteracy works is when you graduate from Southwest High School, it allows you to, whatever classes you pass with that seal, that goes right to college, and you don't have to necessarily take those college courses, so it's a money saver for families. So just because you might live in a particular community, and that's one of those specialty schools where there really is not a lot of leeway at the secondary level, the entry point would be at the elementary level.
Perfect, thank you. Let's give Dr. Romeo an applause. I want to thank all of you for coming out here and taking time out of your schedule. Oh, yeah. Freedom Fund dinner, she just reminded me.
That's right.
October the 20th, which is next Friday at the JW Marriott. Tickets are still up and selling, and but we're running out of space. So if you're interested, go to NAACPGR.com, or you can call our office as well.
Another announcement is on November 11th at Messiah Baptist Church. There will be a GRPS resource fair from 11 a.m. until 1 p.m.
All right. Did you guys hear that?
I'm sorry. November 19th, not Sunday, November 19th.
November 19th, Messiah Baptist Church. Thank you, and to Clee and to the community, thank you for this opportunity. I say this in a place of humbleness. I always take this very seriously. Whenever I get in front of our community, I think it is important to be able to engage and ask questions. And sometimes I might not have the answer, and I think that's okay, but I also want you to know that you give us things to think about. And so if there are things that we did not answer, or if there are things that you think of later, I invite you to send an email to our GRPS website so that we can answer those questions. And the last thing is, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lee, who might do her program. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to remind and invite pastors and faith leaders out to Yes for GRPS Community Conversation next Tuesday, October 17th at 11 a.m. at Life Quest Church. We will be engaging with Dr. Roby and her Chief of Staff, Larry Johnson, for a community conversation, 11 a.m.
And real quick, we do want to mention our family.
It is Yes for GRPS. Sorry, Yes for GRPS.
We also are having 2 family nights on November 1st and 2nd at City and MLK, thank you, and MLK schools. So those are from 5 to 7. We're having dinner and a family night, so please join us.
Again, thank everybody for coming out this evening. One of the things I want to leave you with, if there is no challenge, there will never be innovation. So if there's no challenge, there will never be innovation. And we must make sure that our votes count. So thank you all for coming out this evening. Enjoy the rest of your evening.